My coworker blamed me for a missed deadline in front of 15 people. The room turned silent. My manager stared at me like I had just set the whole project on fire, and that's when I opened my screen and showed them the one email that ended his career-long power trip in 5 seconds flat. I always thought the most dangerous people in an office weren't the ones who openly yelled, argued, or stirred chaos. No, the ones you really had to watch out for were the quiet saboteurs, the ones who smiled as they held the knife, the ones who never got their hands dirty because they were too busy making sure someone else took the blame. And that brings me to Evan. From the very first week I joined our consulting firm, I noticed him. Tall, polished, always dressed like he was on his way to a board meeting with billionaires. He had this hyper-confident walk, chin slightly raised, eyes scanning the room as if he owned it. And maybe that attitude worked on some people, but to me, it felt like a mask, one designed to hide insecurity so deep it needed constant validation to survive. He also had a reputation. People didn't say it up front, but you could sense it in the way they talked about him. Oh, Evan's very assertive. He's ambitious. He has strong opinions. All of those were polite corporate code for he throws people under the bus for fun. At first, I kept my distance. I focused on my work, took on high responsibility tasks, and delivered consistently. I wasn't new to competitive workplaces, and I wasn't naive enough to think everyone played fair. But Evan, he didn't just play unfairly. He rewrote the game in his favor every chance he got. It started small, the kind of microaggressions that are just subtle enough to be denied if confronted. In one meeting, when I was presenting a research update, he casually said, "That's an interesting approach. Not the one I would have used, but okay." Nobody questioned him. Why would they? He spoke with the confidence of a man whose ego had never been challenged. Another time, he interrupted me mid-sentence and said, "I'll take it from here," then proceeded to explain the exact thing I was already explaining, just louder and slower, as if volume made him smarter. Again, I stayed calm. I kept my cool. I told myself I wasn't there for office politics. But the pattern didn't stop. The subtle digs became more pointed, more deliberate. I'd send him updated documents and he'd reply with vague feedback like, "We should talk about the clarity later." But when I asked what specifically needed clarity, he'd dodge the question or claim he was too swamped to go into detail. He'd accidentally forget to loop me into email threads that directly affected my tasks. He'd mention in meetings that he helped optimize my sections, when all he did was skim the document and add a single comma. Still, I let it slide. I didn't want drama. I didn't want enemies. I was there to do my job and do it well. But then came the project that changed everything. It was a major analytics project, one involving several data pipelines, multiple teams, and a tight internal deadline. I was assigned as the lead analyst for the final report. Evan's team was responsible for providing one portion of the input files I needed. If you've ever done corporate work, you know how it goes. Tasks are interconnected. One team can't finish until another team does, and everyone is supposed to hit deadlines so no one gets bottlenecked. I submitted my initial drafts, double-checked everything on my side, organized every part of the project so that when the final data came in, I could plug it in and deliver clean results on time. And for a while, everything looked fine. Until Evan happened. The files he was supposed to send, me, the exact files my entire portion depended on, didn't arrive. Day 1, nothing. Day 2, nothing. I gently reminded him twice. He replied with, "Yeah, working on it." Day 3, nothing. At this point, I was getting concerned. Not panicked, just alert. Something felt off. My internal deadline was coming up, and without those files, I physically couldn't complete the report. So I messaged him again, and he left me unseen. The next morning, I emailed him directly and CC'd the project group, politely asking for the update files and reminding him of our deadline. No response. He was online. He was active. He was even replying to others in the team chat, just not to me. The avoidance felt intentional, calculated. And then finally, at 11:47 p.m., the night before the deadline, the files arrived. No apology. No explanation. Just, "Here you go. Busy day. Hope this helps." This helps. I stared at those words for a good minute, but I didn't let frustration get to me. I forced myself to stay focused. I made coffee, rolled up my sleeves, and worked late into the night to finish everything. I completed the full report first thing the next morning. Despite Evan delaying me by almost 3 days, I thought that would be the end of it. I truly believed that the worst part of the project was over. But then came the meeting that would expose everything, the meeting that would change how everyone in that room saw Evan, the meeting that would turn the tables so hard even he didn't know how to react. It was a big one, our team. 2 department leads, our manager, and a representative from the client. 16 people total. high stakes. High visibility? We all joined the conference room. The energy was focused, serious, professional. I started presenting our findings. The clients were impressed. My manager seemed pleased. Everything was going smoothly. And then, like clockwork, Evan decided he needed attention. He crossed his arms, leaned back, cleared his throat with that dramatic little flourish only people starving for validation use. Then he said the words that made my blood run cold. So, just to clarify, the reason this report came in past the internal deadline was because you were behind, right? Time froze. You know that feeling when you're hit with something so unfair that for a moment you question reality itself? That was me. My brain stalled. My pulse spiked. Heat crawled up my neck. Past the deadline? Me? Everyone in the room turned toward me. The client rep leaned closer to his webcam. My manager's expression shifted, not angry, but confused. Evan wasn't done. Not even close. He added, I just think it's important everyone knows the timeline. Some members of the team weren't as prepared as they should have been. Prepared. As if I had been lounging around. As if I hadn't worked past midnight because of his delay. I looked at him. Not with anger. Not with panic. But with realization. It clicked. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't a misunderstanding. He had waited. Delayed. Ignored my messages. Sent the files at the last minute. And then used the meeting, with leadership present, to blame me for the timeline. It was intentional. Manipulative. Perfectly timed. He wanted to make me look unreliable while positioning himself as the responsible one. In his mind, it was checkmate. And honestly, it might have worked if I hadn't kept receipts. I felt a calmness wash over me. The kind that only comes when anger turns into certainty. My hands stopped shaking. My breathing steadied. I clicked share screen. Evan's smirk twitched. I navigated to my email. Scrolled. Opened the message he sent at 11:47 p.m. Then with absolute composure, I said, I'd be happy to clarify the timeline. These are the files I needed from Evan's team. As you can see, they were sent to me less than 12 hours before the internal deadline. I completed my portion the same morning. Silence. It hit the room like thunder in a vacuum. Every eye widened. Every expression shifted. Even the client rep leaned closer to confirm the timestamp. My manager was the first to speak. Her voice was soft, much softer than I expected, but sharp enough to slice through Evan's ego. So you're the reason this was delayed? Evan's face drained of color. Well, there were scheduling issues, he stammered. No, she said. You should have communicated delays instead of blaming someone else. He shut down after that. No more smirking. No more confidence. Just the quiet collapse of a man whose lies had finally been cornered. And for the first time, I felt something shift inside me. A release, a vindication, a calm, controlled satisfaction. Not because I embarrassed him, but because he exposed himself all on his own. And I realized right then, this wasn't the end of his downfall. It was the beginning. Because after that meeting, things got a whole lot worse for him. The meeting ended, but the aftershocks didn't. As everyone filed out of the room, there was this unmistakable energy in a mix of disbelief and secondhand embarrassment. People weren't whispering, but their expressions said everything. Some avoided looking at Evan. Some shook their heads. Some looked at me with this subtle, respectful nod. But Evan, eyes glued downward, jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. His confidence, that overinflated balloon had finally popped. After weeks of subtle jabs and sabotage, I thought maybe he would apologize, or at least acknowledge what happened. He didn't. Instead, he avoided me completely. He stopped walking past my desk, stopped making comments in meetings, stopped inserting himself into my projects. It was like he had become a ghost of himself, still present but hollowed out. You'd think that would be satisfying enough. And in some ways, it was. But what made everything even more satisfying was what happened in the weeks that followed. Because when someone like Evan gets caught, the cracks start widening fast. A week after the meeting, our manager scheduled one-on-ones with everyone in the department. Standard process, or so I thought, until she asked me for more details about his delay. I explained everything professionally. No embellishments, no pettiness, just facts. She took notes. A lot of notes. Then she asked something surprising. Has this sort of behavior happened before? I paused. She wasn't asking like a boss hunting for gossip. She asked like someone who already suspected the answer. So again, I kept it factual. I told her about the meeting interruptions, the subtle undermining, the habit of taking credit for work he barely touched, the intentional failures to communicate. She nodded, closed her notebook, and said, "Thank you. That's helpful." A sentence that meant far more beneath the surface. Because it wasn't just one person complaining anymore. Other team members had spoken. Patterns were emerging. And Evan. The guy who thought he could tear others down to climb higher was finally being seen for who he really was. 2 weeks later, the fallout began. First, he was removed from 2 high-visibility projects. The official reason? Reallocation of resources. But everyone knew the truth. Then he stopped being copied into executive presentations. Then he started receiving tasks that were, well, basic, not meaningless. But nowhere near the level he bragged about handling. His frustration was palpable. You could see it in the way he slammed his drawer a little too hard, in the passive-aggressive clicks of his keyboard, in the tight-lipped expressions, whenever he overheard project updates. He was no longer part of, but the final blow, the one that sealed everything, it came during an all-hands meeting. Our director brought up workplace accountability and collaboration. Pretty normal topic. But then she added, "We've had several instances, recently, of team members failing to take responsibility for their own delays and instead shifting blame onto others. That behavior will not be tolerated." The room went silent. Every person, and I mean every single one, subtly glanced in Evan's direction. He didn't look up. He didn't move. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the table, face flushed a quiet shade of humiliation. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't always need a victory parade. Sometimes it just needs the truth to stand where lies once lived. But the real turning point, the moment I knew I had finally reclaimed my power, came during another big project review. I was presenting again. Calm, collected, prepared. When I finished, our manager said, "This was excellent work, clear, organized, and delivered ahead of schedule, despite relying on multiple teams." There was a deliberate pause before she added, "Thank you for consistently communicating and setting an example for others." Her eyes flicked briefly, just briefly, toward Evan. He didn't react. He couldn't. His downfall wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, gradual, inevitable. Because when someone builds their whole reputation on false confidence, shortcuts, and manipulation, all it takes is one truth to unravel the entire illusion. Months passed. And while I thrived, taking on bigger projects, earning recognition, being trusted by leadership, Evan faded into the background. Eventually he transferred teams, a fresh start, as HR phrased it. But everyone knew it wasn't voluntary. And the wildest part? He never spoke to me again. Not a word. Not a glare. Not even an awkward hallway nod. He kept his distance, as if coming near me risked him being reminded of the one day he couldn't talk his way out of a lie. And maybe that was his real punishment. Because some people don't fear consequences. They fear exposure. They fear the moment someone sees behind the mask. The moment their carefully crafted persona cracks. The moment the truth, undeniable and unfiltered, stands in the center of a room full of people they tried to impress. And that's exactly what happened. But here's the thing. I didn't destroy him. I didn't sabotage him. I didn't manipulate or plot or engage in revenge fantasies. All I did was show reality. Calmly, factually, undeniably. He destroyed himself. By lying, by blaming, by underestimating the wrong person. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply letting a person's true character reveal itself. No drama, no battle, just truth. And as cliché as it sounds, receipts. Because in the end, all the arrogance in the world can't outshine cold, hard evidence. Even months later, I'd occasionally hear coworkers reference that moment. That meeting really showed us who he was. I've never seen someone shrink that fast. Man, he picked the wrong person to mess with. But my favorite comment came from my manager months later during a review. She smiled and said, "You showed professionalism under pressure. Not many people could have kept their composure while being unfairly blamed like that." I nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement. But my mind went back to that moment, the moment I shared my screen and let the timestamp speak for itself. The moment everything changed. And honestly, even now, it still feels satisfying. Because workplace revenge doesn't always look like dramatic confrontations or elaborate payback schemes. Sometimes it looks like staying calm. Sometimes it looks like having proof. Sometimes it looks like letting someone walk right into the truth they tried to avoid. And sometimes the best revenge really is just receipts,